So we're going to talk today about strategic business analysis for excellence. All right. And now, for some reason, oh, here we go. Screen didn't want to advance. All right. So we're getting going here. Let me start off with talking about information. All right. So we all know about different commodities that we have in our economy. We have things like oil and gas and corn and wheat and diamonds. Okay, diamond. Here, happens to be a picture of the world's largest cut diamond. And so, if this diamond is no longer on this lady's finger and she gives it to somebody else, then she no longer has that commodity. But information is a unique commodity in that if I give you all information, I still have the information, but then you do too. So information is a commodity where its value expands through sharing. And it's interesting to me that I get these questions all the time during my presentations. Is it okay if I share this with so-and-so? Is it okay if please do share this with whoever you deem appropriate, as well as whoever you may deem not appropriate. Okay, please share it because that's how we expand the value of information is through sharing. It's the one unique commodity where we can do that. So today we're going to talk about excellence. We're going to talk about some recent research findings concerning excellence and concerning the human brain processes, as Julia mentioned. We're going to look at process models, particularly related to business analysis and how that can impart excellence to software, which is exactly what the Software Excellence Alliance is all about. And that's part of the reason why I'm so excited to be sharing this here with the group today. And we're going to look at some of the core techniques through a case study. And we're also going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to have a couple of giveaways. And Julia, you're going to help me with those giveaways when we get to them, right? We're looking forward to yeah, yes, we're looking forward to that. And we've got a lot of material to cover. I've got a clock over here kind of to the side of me, so I'll be checking with that clock periodically to make sure we're on time because we do want to leave a few minutes toward the end for any questions or comments from the group, which of course are always very invaluable. Okay, so when I started putting this presentation together, I just thought, well, I better just find out what exactly is excellence, okay? I mean, we hear on the radio advertisements about excellent food or excellent this or excellent that, but what actually is excellence? So when we're looking at the Wikipedia definition, excellence is actually an unusually good quality, but the more important part I think here is that it is a continuously moving target. So as much as we want to have excellence about everything, we never really can actually land on excellence. We just approach closer and closer to excellence all the time. And we folks that have been around in the industry for a while, we sort of understand this, right? We develop software, and then the next version is better than the prior version, and the next version is better than that version, and each version supposedly gets better. So we have to remember that excellence is a continuously moving target. Now let's look at a couple of other definitions. First of all, what is business analysis? Okay, so some of you may know what business analysis is, and some of you may not. There are two main credentialing bodies for business analysts. One is the International Institute of Business Analysis, or the IIBA, and the other one is the Project Management Institute, which of course is the ANSI standard version headquartered here in the United States of America. But the IIBA says that business analysis is a practice of enabling change by defining needs and recommending solutions. Okay, so the key word here is enabling change. And the PMI says that business analysis is the set of activities performed to identify business needs, recommend relevant solutions, and elicit, document, and manage requirements. So if we kind of combine these two definitions, yes.
Can I interrupt you for a second? I'm not seeing your slides.
Oh, okay.
They stopped sharing somehow. So I was looking at your presentation to see, should I be seeing something? It looks like we should be, so.
Okay, yeah. Okay, let me see what's going on here.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh no, thank you for interrupting me. Well, that's interesting. I'm not seeing the slides now for some reason, even on my screen. Yeah.
I mean, I have it
Okay.
open if you need me to share, so just let me know.
Well, let me look at one more thing here, and then we may just go that route because I don't want to waste too much time on this. Okay, share screen. And there we go. Share. Now, can you see the screen?
It's coming up. Yes.
Okay. Not sure what happened there, but let me go back to that definition slide. And
So we're not seeing it in presentation mode, we're seeing it in like edit mode.
okay, we should be able to fix that fairly simply here.
You can go under the bottom right, you can click the little movie thing or the little book. Okay, you got it. Perfect.
Okay, so anyway, these are our definitions of business analysis that I was speaking about, and evidently nobody can see the screen. So the key words here are enabling change and managing requirements. That's what a business analyst does, okay? So there was a study not too long ago by IBM and Xerox, and they showed the effect of information overload on human thinking processes. And one of the things that technology has introduced into society across the world is additional information on the human brain. Okay, we have all these things coming at us all the time that we didn't used to have back in the horse and buggy days, right? Anyway, IBM and Xerox found in their study that 28% of a typical workday is wasted by interruptions that's caused by unnecessary information. And 42% of people use the wrong information at least once a week. And 53% of people believe that less than half the information they receive is actually useful. Now, this is particularly interesting for me because in my current job, I work at the city of Dallas, Texas, and we have two airports around the Dallas, Texas area. One is the DFW International Airport that is situated between Dallas and Fort Worth, and the other one is Love Field, which is right near downtown Dallas. So I was doing some analysis out at Love Field as part of my job, and I learned as part of that analysis that there are on average every day at least 4 passengers in the terminal at Dallas Love Field that believe that they're at the DFW airport. So this is just an example of how people get overloaded with information and they're not able to make sense of what's going on. And I believe that this has led to some of the challenges that we have. And in fact, science shows us, and we're going to see that here in a few minutes, that has led to some of the challenges we have in our society. Some of you may be familiar with Daniel Goleman. He wrote a book called Focus a few years ago, and this book looks at how the human brain focuses. In Goleman's book, he talks about inner focus, outer focus, and other focus. So we may focus inwardly, we may focus outwardly, or we may focus in some other direction. But his book shows that focus is actually the hidden driver to what we call excellence. It showcases what happens along the human focusing continuum. And this next slide here is going to be a depiction of that, and I'm going to tell a little story. So we're all familiar with what we call the flow state, undoubtedly, right? So there's a way of thinking where we get into this flow state. It's a place between conscious and unconscious thought. And we see this a lot, particularly with professional basketball players. They claim that when they're in the flow state, they actually see the ball going through the hoop before they shoot it. They're not paying attention to anything else that's going on around them at the time that they take their shot. They see that the visualize, a lot of visualization happens in this flow state. Well, in Goleman's book, he talks about a neuroscientist, a neurosurgeon actually, that was working on a surgery on a human brain. And it was a very risky surgery. The surgeon wasn't very convinced that the patient was going to even live. So he was in the surgical suite, he was doing the operation, and the ceiling tiles actually started falling off of the ceiling in the surgical suite during the operation process. This surgeon was so focused on doing his surgery that he did not even notice the ceiling tiles falling off the ceiling. After the surgery was over, they asked him whether he noticed the ceiling tiles falling off the ceiling, and he said, no, I had no idea that was happening. So that's where the flow state happens. We're very focused on what's going on. It's a state between being bored, okay, where we have very low attention span, and a place where we're frazzled or just, can't take it anymore because we're very high attention. That flow state is the place where we all want to get in. And as a business analyst, we want to get our stakeholders into that flow state as well. Now, this particular diagram is going to be one of the supplemental handouts that will be available to you, and Julia will speak with you about how you can.
Just lost Trent's audio.
We'll give it a moment and we'll see if
Yeah.
he is back.
It's weird. The Hurricane Beryl is coming through. Like, I think he just got cut. Oh, Trent's back.
Okay, so I'm not sure where we got cut off, Julia, but
So
what we need to do is give
you were
away.
saying that we would let you know how this, we will make the supplemental materials available along with his presentation materials from the C website. And I think
Right.
also from the YouTube link. So you're not
Okay.
sharing again, so.
Okay, I'll tell you what, Julia, do you want to just go ahead and share from this point? I'm not sure why I just don't want to go through the rest of the presentation and have this continue to cut out.
Yeah, sure. Hang on 1 second. Let me get there. Share screen. Okay, can everyone see?
Yes, we
That's
can,
good.
Julia.
Okay. So I know it's here on this slide.
Okay, the next one is the giveaway. Okay, so we're going to give away Daniel Goleman's book.
Hmm.
And I see that we have 13 participants, Julia, in the meeting here today.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask Stephen if he would pick a number between 1 and 13. Stephen, what would that number be? And if you're saying something, Stephen, you're muted.
And we are having a technological challenge today.
10.
10. 10 says Stephen. Okay, so Julia, if you would either count up from the bottom or top down to the 10th participant, and that will be the person that we need to get their mailing address to send them Daniel Goleman's book.
Okay, so that is Matt McConnell.
Matt McConnell. Okay, so Matt, if you could hold on at the end, we'll make sure we get your mailing address. Okay, we'll send this to you.
Private message us as well.
Right. Okay. Okay, Julia, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, sorry, I got too many things going on at once.
Okay, so this machine is what's called a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. And I'm actually a participant with a major U.S. university, the University of Texas, and several neuroscientists around the whole world. In fact, 160 different neuroscientists, where we are studying how the human brain works. And I go into this machine about every 6 months, and this machine actually can look inside the human brain, as you see on the photograph here on the right-hand side, to see what's happening inside the human brain as it's thinking about things, okay? Okay, next slide, Julia. So one of the things that we're learning about in our brain research with this functional magnetic resonance machine has to do with George Miller's number. George Miller was a research professor at Harvard and Princeton back in the 1950s who was commissioned by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration to determine how many things a human being can simultaneously focus on in order to be sure that the astronauts would be safe. They didn't want to overload the astronauts with too many things to do. So George Miller at that time did not have an fMRI machine, but he determined that a human being can focus on no more than 7 things at one time, plus or minus 2. So some humans could focus on 9 things, and some humans could focus on only about 5 things. Okay, go ahead, Julia. Then, with the space shuttle, along came Clara Moskowitz. And here's Clara at the fMRI machine that NASA owns at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And they decided to do this again with the fMRI machine back in about 2008. to see how many things an astronaut could think about at one time. And through the fMRI science, Clara determined that a human being can only focus on about 4 things at one time. Now, remember, this is also during the time frame when we're being introduced to Windows software and this whole idea in the software industry that, man, now with Windows and all these windows can be open on your screen, and you can have 4 or 5 screens going at the same time, plus your cell phone, plus your regular telephone, plus talking to the person in the room. We can get so much more done by multitasking. Well, next slide, Julia. What we have learned at the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas, where we're engaged with 160 neuroscientists across the globe, is that multitasking is a myth. Human beings can only effectively focus on no more than one subject at a time. And this research was announced about 3 years ago now. So that's something to keep in mind in your practices, whatever you do. Remember, this idea that you can focus on multiple things at one time is a myth. And I could go into an entire discussion about how we know these things. We've done a lot of analysis with high-performing athletes, et cetera, and so forth, and as well as the fMRI machine. Okay, next slide, Julia. So here's another aspect of how people think about things differently. People have different perceptions about the same thing, right? How many sticks are there here? Are there 3 or are there 4? It depends on where your focus is at. Okay, next. How about this cat? Is this cat going up the stairs or down the stairs? Next. How many dots are here? Are the dots static or are they moving around? And how would you even know for sure? Okay, next. Contextually, the same thing can mean different things in different cultures. This sign of okay in the US means generally okay. It has a newer meaning within the last few years. But generally that in the US and the UK means okay. In Russia, it just simply means 0. In Japan, this is the symbol for money. And in Brazil, this is a severe insult to show this to somebody. So context also plays a factor in how we are focused. Okay, next. So we talked earlier about our definitions for business analysis, right? We basically distilled between the 2 definitions that business analysis is enabling change and managing requirements. Okay, next. Okay, so what is a requirement? We talked about what is business analysis. So what is a requirement? Well, the IIBA says it's a usable representation of a need, okay? Focused on understanding what kind of value can be delivered when the requirement is fulfilled. So it's a usable representation of a need. And the Project Management Institute states that a requirement is a condition or capability required to be present in a product, service, or result to satisfy a contract or otherly imposed specification. Okay, so that's what a requirement is. Next. Okay, now this next series of slides is going to talk a little bit about Agile and Waterfall. And Julia, we're going to kind of go through these fairly quickly because I'm making somewhat of an assumption that most of these people on this call today have an idea about what is Agile and what is Waterfall, okay? Of course, with Waterfall, our requirements that we just talked about are determined up front at the beginning of the initiative. With Agile, requirements are determined ongoing. Now, because we know that excellence is a continuously moving target, my suggestion to you today is that this ongoing Agile way of determining the requirements is the best way to lend excellence to our initiative through business analysis. And I'm going to show you that more here in just a few minutes. Okay, Julia, next. Okay, one of the key Agile concepts is that we want to fail early and it's okay to fail often. And the failure frequency lessens as the product development progresses, right? Next. One of the key Agile cornerstones is that individuals and interactions are valued more than processes and tools, and that relationships are vital. Okay, next. These are some of the agile methodologies. Of course, the Project Management Institute, as some of you may be aware, is very much embracing the second one here. Mark Lyons' disciplined agile delivery methodology, but there are several of them. Okay, next. Okay, the IIBA says that agile business analysis ensures that the right information is available in the right level of detail and at the right time so that the product can be built. And we're going to see that more in our real world example here in just a minute. Okay, next. Okay, there are a couple of agile references here. Requirements lifecycle management assesses, analyzes, and gains consensus on requirements changes. And then one that we maybe are familiar with is called RAD, or Requirements Analysis and Definition. This is where incremental and iterative activities from the concept to the solution are done as far as the requirements go. Okay, next. All right, so we're going to go through these next slides fairly quickly, Julie. So agile means people and interaction more valuable than processes and tools. Okay, next. Working software, more important than comprehensive definition. Next. Customer collaboration, more important than contract negotiation. Next. Responding to change, more important than following a plan. Okay, next. All right, so now we're going to take the deeper dive into the core management techniques through looking at a real world case study. And the case study I'm going to look at today has to do with this chocolatier based out of Brussels, Belgium, okay? And before I started working with the folks over in Brussels, I always thought that this was the Godiva chocolatier. However, I am from Texas, but I was educated that the correct pronunciation, and this again goes back sort of what we were talking about our culture earlier, the correct pronunciation of this brand is Godiva. That's how it's pronounced by the people that work there. It's Godiva chocolates, okay? But we're going to look at several different management techniques. We're going to look at needs assessment, management planning, elicitation, analysis, monitoring and controlling, solution evaluation, and closure. And one lucky participant or attendee today is going to receive a box of Godiva chocolates. Okay, next. So here's our model, okay? Notice that we start off with needs assessment, then we go through the different steps that we just talked about. And notice, and I'll point this out again here in a few minutes as well, that the arrows here, several of them are bidirectional. It means that, like for example, with requirements management planning, while we're doing solution evaluation and requirements elicitation, some of the functions that happen in the requirements management planning process can also be taking place. And throughout the initiative, one of the overlying or underlying aspects that's always happening is requirements monitoring and controlling. Okay, so this is our model. And again, if you get the handouts, you'll have this model as well. Okay, next. So let's take a look at Godiva's purpose. This is directly from Godiva's website. I think it's very interesting that this company has been in business in an international way since 1926. And they claim that their purpose is to open people's eyes to a more wonderful world. And I just think that's very interesting that a chocolatier would claim that that is their mission statement, to open people's eyes to a more wonderful world. And I think it's also interesting that one of their core values is to be agile. Okay, and we're going to take a look at that as we go through the rest of the presentation. Okay, go ahead. All right, so first of all, the first box or the first process in our flow is needs assessment. All right, so in needs assessment, this is where we determine the goals and the opportunities and the objectives for enhancing value. It includes assessing current capabilities and defining the desired future state. Okay, next. Some of the techniques for needs assessment are listed here: a strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities analysis, or a SWOT analysis, decision analysis, gap analysis, benchmarking, value stream analysis, et cetera, and so on. If you get the handouts, you'll see a list of a lot more techniques that can be used in needs assessment, as well as the definition of what happens during those techniques. So if you have a business analyst you're working with, and you're not sure what the business analyst is doing, you could give them your handout and say, I want you to do a gap analysis, and here's how you do that. Okay, so next slide, Julia. So with the Godiva example here, they wanted to take a look at their distribution channel. And this was a couple years back now. But what was happening was that they were finding that their product was not being sold in retail stores like it used to be prior to retail declining, especially when the virus came about. Okay. Their product was sitting on the retail shelves and basically wasting away and rotting, and they were losing money. And Amazon at the same time, you know, of course, was coming up and things were being purchased through Amazon, including Godiva chocolates. So they decided that what they needed to do is they needed to figure out how they could change their distribution channel. And so they chose the benchmarking technique in their needs assessment phase. They wanted to compare what was going on with Godiva to what was going on with Amazon, and why couldn't Godiva chocolates be shipped around the world the same way that Amazon ships other products. And in fact, you can buy Godiva chocolates on Amazon now. But one of their big concerns was maintaining the temperature. You know, if you ship a chocolate and then record heat is happening, it tends to melt, right? And so the person that received the chocolate would receive chocolate that was melted, and that wasn't any good because you know, who likes melted chocolate, right? So anyway, maintaining temperature was one of the things that they identified through this benchmarking that needed to be done. Okay, next. Okay, so then management planning. Okay, so management planning is the next step in the process flow here. This is where we direct and guide the requirements. And another term that maybe you've heard, especially if you've been around the IEEE, is requirements engineering. Okay, a lot of military people that work on fast military airplanes talk about the requirements engineering that's constantly being done. And in fact, there's an ISO standard, 24773-2, that talks specifically about requirements engineering. But the key thing to remember here is that with management planning, it includes things like stakeholder analysis and engagement and the requirements management plan. The stakeholders determine, depending on the initiative, how are the requirements going to be managed in this plan for this product that we're working on. Okay, and again, note in the purple colored box here that requirements management planning can be bi-directional. It can happen at the same time that we're doing elicitation, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. It can happen at the same time because we may find that we need to tweak our requirements management plan as we go along to make it suitable to what the stakeholders' needs are. Okay, next. Some of the techniques here, of course, are stakeholder register mind mapping. Mind mapping is a relatively new technique, but it has to do with learning how to understand how the various stakeholders think about things. Not everybody thinks about things the same way, as we saw earlier with the example of how many sticks are there, 3 or 4, or is the cat going up the stairs or down the stairs? If you're working with people from multiple different cultures, you need to understand that their cultures may have different ways of viewing things. And I'm certain we all in software engineering encounter this more and more with our work becoming more globalized all the time. Other techniques here are organizational standards. If the organization has a particular standard that they use for requirements managing planning, that would be something that would be adhered to, et cetera, and so forth. Okay, next, Julia. Okay, so we've talked about the needs assessment, and then we've talked about requirements management planning. Now we're going to kind of get to the core of things here, and that is the elicitation from the stakeholder of the requirements, the analysis of those requirements, and then the solution evaluation. Now notice here that this is a continuously moving target right here in the heart of this. And we learned earlier that excellence itself is a continuously moving target, right? And also at the bottom, the requirements monitoring and controlling is happening at the same time that we're doing the heart of things, the solution evaluation, the requirements elicitation, and the requirements analysis. So let's talk now about elicitation. Okay, Julia, next. Thank you so much for advancing these slides, Julia. I just can't imagine what this would have been like with these things getting stuck. Anyways, going smoothly for now. Thank you for that. So elicitation is where we identify reasons and requirements for seizing an opportunity. Okay, what are the reasons? What are the requirements that we want to make sure that these chocolates go through a distribution channel of going through shipping and not melting and things? This includes stakeholder engagement, planning, defining the actual requirements, both functional and non-functional requirements. And one of the types of requirements that was left off of this slide is also even the transition requirements, okay? How do we go from one state where we're selling our chocolates in a retail outlet to going into this distribution channel of going through shipping the chocolates? And then, of course, there is a progressive elaboration that happens here that includes communicating, validating, and documenting. Okay, next. So there's lots of different elicitation techniques. Here are just a few that are listed, okay? And of course, if you get the handouts, you'll see a fully blown list of these. Okay, next, and their definitions. Okay, so of course, with Godiva, we're focused again on the distribution channel. That was where the needs assessment led us to. And for elicitation, the decision was made to go with interviews and focus groups. Okay, so the interviews were about capabilities and functions. What are the capabilities in the production plant for packaging? How can we maintain the temperature? So we did a lot of interviews with people that worked in various aspects of the distribution channel and of the manufacturing channel to determine what are the capabilities and functions and how would we maintain the temperature. And then we also had a group, a focus group, and actually this focus group is still kind of going on even today, and that had to do with packaging. You can imagine that the packaging would have to change in order to keep the chocolates from melting. So how, and Godiva, the folks at Godiva are very concerned about their image. They want to make sure that everything exudes excellence, that gold is their color, okay? They want to make sure that nothing looks cheap, and their chocolates are not cheap either. They want to be the high-end chocolatier. And so the focus groups had to make sure that the packaging that was going to be modified for the new distribution channel to maintain temperature would be adequate. Okay, so those were the two techniques used in this particular example. Okay, next. All right, and then now we move along to the analysis. All right, so analysis, for example, here are some of the ways that we can do that. It includes planning and collaboration, identifying the different attributes, prioritizing and allocating, verifying and validating. Okay, next. And here are some of the techniques, okay? You probably have heard or are somewhat familiar with these techniques. Okay, next. With the Godiva example, we chose the Moscow techniques, okay? So Moscow, of course, is must, should, could, or won't. This is where we put together maybe like a spreadsheet of the different requirements for packaging. What must be done? You know, for example, they wanted to make sure that a truffle, okay, a truffle is a type of a chocolate. They wanted to make sure that it had a lot more cushioning around that truffle than maybe a hard chocolate would, because the hard chocolate wouldn't break apart as easily as the truffle would. So the must aspect of this was, you know, the packaging requirements for the truffle had to be fully loaded so the truffle couldn't break. We didn't even need any cushioning necessarily for the hard chocolates. So the hard chocolates would not have cushioning. So this is where we identify what must, should, could, or won't be present depending on each particular requirement. Okay? All right, next. Okay, and so we talked a little bit about monitoring and oh, Julia, could you go back to that prior slide, or is this easy? Yeah, so let's talk about this a minute. Actually, go back to the one prior to that if you don't mind. One of the things I want to point out here with analysis is it's very important, and I think it's important for software developers, but it's certainly important for when a business analyst is engaged, but it's also important for software developers. Make sure that you get documentation based on the analysis from the stakeholders about what it is exactly that they want. Okay. So we call that verifying and validating the documentation. So verifying means I get with Julia and I say, I just want to make sure, Julia, that you want to have more cushion around a truffle than a hard chocolate. Is that correct? And Julia says, yes, I don't even need any cushioning around a hard chocolate. So I take that off of my Moscow list and say on the hard chocolate, we won't have cushioning, but I get that documented with Julia. I get it documented. Now, what does documented mean? Documented can mean a sign off. It can mean an email. Okay. It can mean a video. Okay. It can mean lots of different things, but it's very important to have that validation. We call that the validation part. The verifying is where I make sure I'm clear with Julia on what it is she wants, or my stakeholder on what it is they want. But then the validation part is where we actually have that documentation that we can go back to if later on our stakeholder comes back and says, well, that's not what I really meant. Okay, so somebody gets a broken hard chocolate in the mail, and then all of a sudden they think, oh, I, I didn't really mean that. I meant we didn't need as much cushioning. Okay. Now, those of us that have been around as developers or anything else, we know that this can happen all the time, right? Because again, it has to do with excellence. People think they know what they want, but until they understand that this excellence is a continuously moving target, and maybe they do need a little bit of cushioning on the hard chocolates, um, they don't want to necessarily always, especially when there's dollars concerned, they don't want to be the one that's responsible for giving the wrong answer. So I can't stress that enough about making sure that you get the documentation. Okay. All right. So thank you, Julie. We can go on now to the next part, next slide. Okay. So monitoring and controlling. We talked about the fact that this goes on throughout the entire initiative. Okay. We have things like change control boards, dependency analysis. Okay, impact analysis and traceability matrices are some of the techniques. Okay, next. So with Godiva, we put together a traceability matrix. We made sure that the requirements from before the ingredients were ever put into the copper kettle to cook, to the actual implementation into the box and the distribution to the customer, that everything was traceable, everything was done according to the requirements that Godiva set forth. And a traceability matrix, of course, is just a way that we can double check ourselves. And also we can find out if problems are happening through the traceability matrix. We can find out more exactly, focus ourselves in on where are those problems at, right? Okay, next slide. And then, of course, the solution evaluation. This is where we assess whether the solution is delivering the value that it was designed to deliver, okay? And this is where this is where the failure becomes less as we go through this iteration more and more and more. We evaluate the solution and we say, okay, did that cushioning work? Well, no, but we need to, so now on the next iteration, we need to put a different kind of cushioning. Okay, did that cushioning work? Yeah, better, but we can still do better. Okay, so we get closer and closer to excellence in this solution evaluation thing. And we also validate and verify here. Did we do the right thing? And did we do things correctly? And let me suggest that it's oftentimes, not always, but it's very oftentimes important in this solution evaluation process to have an independent validator and verifier. Okay, somebody that doesn't have a dog in the hunt, or a dog in the show, or whatever. That way, it takes away any temptation that we may have to what in Texas we use this term. I don't think anybody's going to recognize this term, but you might. We use this term called crawfishing. Okay. Well, that's not exactly what I meant, but we can check it off. It's okay anyway. Just to kind of weasel their way out of actually whether or not it actually did deliver the value. Okay. A lot of times it's very difficult, especially if we have a dog in the hunt, to admit that, we didn't do things quite as correctly as we could. So let's just go back through it and do it again. And that gets back to the whole premise from the Agile Alliance. Failing is okay. Okay. We're just going to fail less as we go along, as we more closely approach excellence. But it's important to do this validation at the end of every single iteration. Okay. Because if we forget to do this, how are we going to do things better the next time around? Okay. Next. Okay. And of course, there's different techniques here, and get the handouts and you'll get the whole list of techniques. But we can do testing and demos, okay? And I really enjoyed this part with Godiva because I could order some chocolate and just see what came, and test it out and see if it tasted right or not. And somebody here today is going to get to do that too. We can do checklists, and we can do soliciting stakeholder feedback, like with the next slide, Julia, we did with, um, next slide, Julia. We did with Godiva. We did the Delphi technique. This is where we did an anonymous review. We would anonymously ask people what they thought about the chocolate that they received in 110-degree weather that sat in their mailbox for 2 days. And we had some people that came back especially at the very beginning, that said, you know what? It was totally a disaster. It was all melted and I want my money back, right? But today, the success rate with the distribution is nearly 100%, no matter what the weather is. Okay. So we always are identifying the new needs. Okay. Next. So here's an actual email that came as a result of our work on this process. And this particular email was actually on the 14th. Okay. So it was a couple of years ago. But it was right in the middle of summertime, as you can see, and you can see right on the web, right on the email there. It says the cold pack shipping ensures the arrival in the perfect condition. Okay, and it does. It all arrives now in the perfect condition. Okay, next. Okay, so we've talked about, with our example here with Godiva, all of the different processes. This applies to anything you're doing, whether it's just a software development, and I say just a software development. As you can imagine, this whole process had a lot to do with software development. I mean, yes, the chocolate and everything was the product, but there's lots of different processes in here that have to do with software systems and techniques and how that's done. What packaging do we put, with what cushioning and stuff? It all basically works in software products. So whether you're talking about a software product or developing an airplane or anything you're doing, this is the process you can go through, particularly as a business analyst. Okay, next. Okay, so there's one thing that we kind of did put on the process plan here, and that is closure. Okay, and that is because, as we all know, in Agile, closure is a little bit elusive. Okay, especially with excellence, because even though we think we're done, there really isn't anything that's ever done, because we can always, always, always make it better, right? We just approach that excellence. But you can't forget to do the closure when you claim that you're done, because of course the lessons learned, which will transfer the knowledge that you learned to future iterations where you may not even be available. And it also helps to support transition from, a test environment or a development environment into production, right? Whether we're talking about software or a product like Godiva chocolates. Okay, next. And then, of course, there's a couple of techniques here that I like. I believe there's only 2 I listed in the handouts, but one, of course, is expert judgment. I don't really like expert judgment because I have a real challenge with determining what exactly constitutes an expert. Okay, I mean, there are some things that are a little easier than others, but a lot of times that's very subjective. But then we can talk about retrospectives with the whole team. What worked, what didn't work, and most importantly, why, and document those things so that when somebody else picks up the ball later to look at this process, maybe Godiva is going to start selling coffee, and they run into some new challenges with coffee. They can look at the retrospectives and save themselves a lot of time and start off in a more excellent spot than they would have otherwise. Okay, next slide. All right, so Julia, now we're ready for giveaway number 2. So I'm going to ask Stephen to pick a number between, hey, we have 18 people. I don't think anybody dropped off. That's wonderful. We have 18 people. So can you think of a number between 1 and 18, please, Stephen?
Let's say 8.
8. Okay, Julia. So if you'd count either from the bottom up or the top down and pick who is number 8, we need their address so we can mail them some Godiva chocolates.
Okay, so I've got Jeff Pulcini.
All right, Jeff. So if you can get us your address, maybe stay on here at the end or put it in the chat or whatever. And so we can make sure we are able to send you some Godiva chocolates, which I will be willing to almost guarantee you will arrive in excellent condition. Okay, and I believe we have one more slide, Julia. Okay, so actually we've got 2 more slides. So we've talked about excellence. We've talked about kind of how the human mind gets itself around excellence. We talked about the flow state and things like that. We talked about definitions and models for business analysis, and we looked at the core techniques for putting business analysis to work in our initiative. We talked about an example with Godiva chocolate. Okay, next, Julia. I want to bring up one more thing here in closing. There's a new notion that has just emerged from the Center for Brain Health called brainomics. Okay, and it's a very interesting thing, and I really truly believe we're going to start hearing more about this in the days forward. We've got a lot going on in our society, as I think we all know, and one of the things that we've got going on is that we're all overloaded, as we talked about earlier, with information. And not only that, but if you look up the statistics for how many people are going to have dementia and Alzheimer's in the next decade, it almost makes me anyway want to get in the bed and pull the covers over my head. It's really kind of scary. Yes, medicine may come up with some things to help with Alzheimer's and dementia, and maybe robots and artificial intelligence will help us with that too if we embrace it correctly. But we have a real challenge. And if people want to thrive and they want a strong economy, the business models that harm our brain capital must disappear. The brain is the only organ in a human being that cannot be replaced. Yes, heart transplants can happen, but who do you know that's ever had a brain transplant? And if you've ever had anybody in your family that's lost their mind or has Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever, you know that it's a very tragic thing. But we've got to slow down on all this multitasking and get our focus on things so that we can work through some of our problems.